The wind howled like 1,000 wolves as Delilah Zimmerman clutched her 2 children closer to her body, their small forms trembling beneath the threadbare blankets she had wrapped around them in the back of the wagon. Snow whipped across the Alaskan wilderness with such ferocity that she could barely see 3 feet ahead, and the cold had long since stopped feeling like cold at all, instead becoming a dull numbness that crept from her fingertips toward her heart. Her husband had left them there 2 hours ago, or maybe it was 3. She had lost track of time in the endless white chaos that surrounded them. He had said he was going to find help, that he would be back soon, but Delilah knew in the deepest part of her soul that Jacob was not coming back, that he had finally done what he had threatened to do for months, and left her and their children to whatever fate the brutal Alaskan winter of 1891 had in store for them. Her daughter Sarah, only 5 years old, had stopped crying an hour ago, and that terrified Delilah more than the screaming wind or the accumulating snow that was slowly burying their wagon. Her son Thomas, at 3 years old, still whimpered softly against her chest, his little fingers clutching at her worn coat with a desperation that broke her heart into smaller and smaller pieces. She tried to sing to them, tried to keep them talking, but her voice came out as barely more than a whisper, stolen away by the storm before it could reach their ears. The horses had broken free from their harnesses when Jacob left, spooked by the thunder of the blizzard, and without them, there was no possibility of moving the wagon even if she had the strength to try. Delilah pressed her lips to Sarah's forehead and felt the cold skin beneath them, too cold, and panic surged through her exhausted body. She pulled both children even tighter, trying to share what little warmth remained in her own failing body, and she prayed harder than she had ever prayed in her 23 years of life. She prayed for a miracle, for salvation, for anything that might save her babies from freezing to death in this God-forsaken wilderness that she had never wanted to come to in the first place. Jacob had insisted they could make a fortune in the gold fields near Nome, Alaska, had promised her a better life. But all he had delivered was hardship and cruelty, and now this final betrayal. The wagon creaked and groaned under the weight of the snow, and Delilah wondered if they would be buried alive, if some poor soul would find them in the spring thaw, frozen together in their final embrace. She closed her eyes and held her children and waited for the end, because what else could she do? There was nowhere to go, no shelter to seek, nothing but endless white death in every direction. Sarah made a small sound, barely audible, and Delilah forced her eyes open again, forced herself to stay conscious, because if she fell asleep now, she knew none of them would ever wake up. That was when she heard it, a sound that did not belong to the storm, the sound of a horse moving through deep snow, the creak of leather, and then a voice, deep and strong, calling out through the wind. Delilah tried to respond, but her voice would not work properly, so she managed only a weak cry that she was certain would be lost to the blizzard. But then the wagon shifted and a face appeared over the side, a man's face mostly hidden behind a thick scarf and the brim of a snow-covered hat, but his eyes were visible, dark and filled with concern. "Madam, can you hear me?" The man shouted over the wind, already climbing into the wagon bed with them. "I am getting you out of here, all of you. Hold on now." Delilah wanted to thank him, wanted to ask who he was and where he had come from, but she could not form the words. She felt him lift Sarah from her arms, felt the terrible emptiness where her daughter's small body had been, and she tried to hold on tighter to Thomas, but the man was speaking to her again, his voice firm but not unkind. "Let me take the boy too, madam. I will keep them safe. I swear it on my life, but you need to trust me right now. Can you stand?" She could not stand, but she tried, and she felt the man's strong arm around her waist, supporting her weight as he somehow managed to help her out of the wagon while carrying Thomas in his other arm. Through the swirling snow, she could see a large horse, much bigger than the ones Jacob had owned, and she could see Sarah already secured in some kind of bundle against the saddle. The man lifted Thomas up and secured him the same way, and then, before Delilah could process what was happening, she felt herself being lifted onto the horse's back, positioned in front of the saddle with her children bundled between her arms. The man mounted behind her, his arms coming around her on either side to grasp the reins, and suddenly they were moving, pushing through the storm with a purpose and direction that seemed impossible in the whiteout conditions. Delilah wanted to ask where they were going, wanted to know who this stranger was who had appeared out of nowhere like an answer to her desperate prayers. But the cold and exhaustion were pulling her down into darkness, and the last thing she felt before consciousness left her was the solid warmth of the man behind her and the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them. When Delilah opened her eyes again, the first thing she noticed was warmth, blessed warmth that seemed to seep into her bones and chase away the deathly chill that had taken up residence there. The second thing she noticed was that she was lying on something soft, a bed with actual quilts and blankets piled on top of her, and there was firelight dancing across rough wooden walls. Panic seized her, and she tried to sit up, tried to find her children, but a gentle hand pressed against her shoulder, holding her down. "Easy now. Your little ones are right here, safe and sound," a woman's voice said, and Delilah turned her head to see an older woman, perhaps 50 years old, with graying hair and kind eyes, sitting in a chair beside the bed. "They are sleeping by the fire, wrapped up warm. They will be fine, just like you will be fine. You all gave us quite a scare, though." Delilah's eyes found her children, and she saw them indeed sleeping peacefully on a pile of blankets near a large stone fireplace, their cheeks pink with warmth instead of pale with cold. Relief flooded through her so intensely that tears sprang to her eyes and spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. The older woman made soothing sounds and pressed a cup of something hot into her hands, helping her sit up enough to drink. "Where am I?" Delilah managed to ask, her voice coming out rough and cracked. "You are at the Anderson Ranch, about 15 miles outside of Nome," the woman said. "My son Malcolm found you and your children in that blizzard. Lord knows how he managed it, but that boy has always had a sixth sense about storms and trouble. Been riding these lands for 26 years and knows every inch of them like the back of his hand. Malcolm. So that was the name of the man who had saved them." Delilah wanted to thank him, needed to thank him, needed to see with her own eyes that he was real and not some fever dream she had conjured in her dying moments. As if summoned by her thoughts, a door opened and a rush of cold air swept into the room, followed by the man himself, stomping snow from his boots and pulling off his heavy coat. Without the layers of winter gear, Delilah could finally see him properly, and something in her chest tightened unexpectedly. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, strong build of a man who worked hard for his living. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and fell past his collar in slight waves that were still damp from the snow. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with strong features and a jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her attention most, deep brown and surprisingly gentle despite the hard lines of his face, eyes that found hers immediately as he entered the room. "You are awake," he said, and his voice without the howling wind around it was deep and warm, with a slight roughness that suggested he was not a man who spoke more than necessary. "That is good. How are you feeling?" "Like I was half frozen to death," Delilah said, managing a weak smile. "Thank you for saving us. I do not know how you found us in that storm, but you saved our lives. All three of us would have died out there if not for you." Malcolm shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Could not leave you out there. What kind of man would I be if I rode past someone in need?" He moved to the fireplace and checked on the children, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he adjusted the blankets around them. They seemed to be recovering well. "The little girl, Sarah. She woke up about an hour ago, drank some broth, and went back to sleep. The boy has not stirred yet, but his breathing is good and strong." "Thomas has always been a deep sleeper," Delilah said, her heart swelling with love and relief as she watched her son's chest rise and fall steadily. Even as a baby, he could sleep through anything. Malcolm's mother, who had introduced herself as Martha Anderson, brought Delilah more hot soup and a thick slice of bread with butter, insisting she eat every bite. As Delilah ate, Malcolm excused himself to tend to the animals, and Martha sat back down in her chair, her knitting needles clicking together as she worked on what looked like a sock. "I do not mean to pry," Martha said after a few minutes of comfortable silence, "but Malcolm mentioned your wagon was empty except for you and the children. Where is your husband?" The bread turned to ash in Delilah's mouth, and she had to force herself to swallow it down. "He left us," she said quietly, staring at the bowl in her hands. "Said he was going for help, but he took his horse and his pack with all his supplies. He is not coming back." Martha's needles stopped clicking and the older woman's face softened with sympathy. "I am sorry, dear. That is a terrible thing to do to anyone, let alone a wife and children in a blizzard." "He was not a good man," Delilah admitted, the words spilling out of her now that she had started. "I should have left him long ago, but I had nowhere to go, no family, no money of my own. He convinced me to come north with promises of gold and a new life, but all he wanted was to drink and gamble and blame me when his schemes did not work out. I think he planned this, planned to leave us out there. The storm came up so sudden, but he did not seem surprised by it." "Then you are well rid of him," Martha said firmly, her needles resuming their rhythm. "And you are safe here now, you and your children. You can stay as long as you need to recover and figure out what you want to do next. We have plenty of room, and it is nice to have another woman in the house. Truth be told, it has just been Malcolm and me since my husband died 5 years back, and the house feels too empty sometimes." Delilah felt tears threatening again at the kindness of this stranger who owed her nothing. "I cannot impose on you like that. You have already done so much." "Nonsense," Martha said. "What good is a big house and plenty of food if we cannot share it with those in need? Besides, Malcolm will be happy to have children around. He loves little ones, always has, though he never talks about it. I think he had hoped to have a family of his own by now, but the right woman has not come along yet." That night, after Sarah and Thomas had woken up and eaten and been reassured that they were safe, Delilah tucked them both into a real bed in a small room that Martha said had belonged to Malcolm's younger sister before she married and moved to Seattle. The children fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by their ordeal, and Delilah sat with them for a long time, just watching them breathe and thanking God that they were alive. When she finally emerged from the room, she found Malcolm sitting at the large kitchen table, writing something in a ledger by lamplight. He looked up when she entered and gestured to the coffee pot on the stove. "Help yourself if you want some. Ma has already gone to bed, but she made plenty." Delilah poured herself a cup, and after a moment of hesitation, sat down at the table across from him. "I wanted to thank you again, properly this time. You risked your life going out in that storm. Not many men would have done that." Malcolm closed his ledger and leaned back in his chair, studying her with those dark eyes that seemed to see more than she was comfortable with. "I was checking on the cattle in the north pasture when the storm hit. Saw your wagon tracks in the snow before the wind covered them up completely. Could not have been more than 20 minutes old. Figured whoever made them was in trouble. How did you find us in that whiteout? I could not see anything." "The horse," Malcolm said simply. "Buck, the one that brought us all home. He is half wild, born up in these mountains, and he has instincts that no regular horse has. I gave him his head and he led me straight to you, like he knew exactly where you were. I do not pretend to understand it, but I have learned to trust him." They talked for over an hour, and Delilah found herself opening up to this quiet, steady man in ways she had not opened up to anyone in years. She told him about her life before Jacob, about growing up in an orphanage in San Francisco, about the young woman's dreams she had once had of a loving husband and a happy home. She told him about how Jacob had seemed kind at first, how he had courted her with pretty words and promises, and how everything had changed once they were married. She told him about the slow accumulation of cruelties, the drinking, the gambling, the way he would disappear for days at a time and return with wild stories of fortunes just within his grasp. Malcolm listened without interrupting, and when she finally fell silent, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "My father was a hard man," he said slowly, as if the words did not come easily to him. "Not cruel exactly, but he believed a man showed his strength by never showing softness. Never told my mother he loved her, not where anyone could hear. Never hugged us children after we were old enough to walk. But he worked himself to death trying to provide for us, trying to build this ranch into something that could support a family. Dropped dead of a heart attack while hauling fence posts in the summer heat. He was only 48 years old." He paused and took a sip of his coffee, his eyes distant with memory. "At his funeral, my mother cried harder than I had ever seen anyone cry. Said she wished he had worked a little less and loved a little more openly, that she would have traded this whole ranch for one more day of him just holding her and telling her she mattered. I swore that day that if I ever had a family of my own, I would never let them doubt how much I cared about them. Life is too short and too hard out here to waste time on pride or stubbornness." Delilah felt something shift in her chest, something she had thought was dead after years with Jacob. She looked at Malcolm, really looked at him, and saw not just the man who had saved her life, but a man of depth and kindness and quiet strength. A man who had clearly never married, not because he could not find a woman, but because he was waiting for the right one. A man who, despite the hardness required to survive in this brutal land, had somehow held onto his gentleness. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm that surprised Delilah with how natural it felt. She helped Martha with the cooking and cleaning, grateful to have something useful to do, while Sarah and Thomas regained their strength and began to explore their new surroundings with the irrepressible curiosity of children. Malcolm spent his days working the ranch, caring for the small herd of cattle and horses that were his livelihood, but he always made time to play with the children when he came in for meals. Delilah watched him with her son and daughter, saw how patient he was with their endless questions, how he never talked down to them or dismissed their concerns. He carved Thomas a wooden horse one evening, sitting by the fire with his knife and a piece of scrap wood, and the look of pure joy on her son's face when Malcolm presented it to him made her want to cry. He taught Sarah how to feed the chickens without being afraid of them, kneeling in the snow beside her and showing her how to scatter the grain while speaking to her in that low, calm voice that seemed to soothe even the most skittish animals. Martha noticed, of course. Mothers always notice such things. One afternoon, while they were kneading bread together in the warm kitchen, she said casually, "My son likes you." Delilah felt her cheeks heat and focused very intently on the dough beneath her hands. "He has been very kind to all of us." "It is more than kindness," Martha said, her voice gentle. "I have not seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you since he was a young man and had his heart broken by the mayor's daughter." She thought she loved him until her father reminded her that she could marry a banker in Seattle instead of a rancher in Alaska. "Malcolm has kept himself locked up tight ever since, but you and your children, you are cracking that shell he built around himself." "I am still married," Delilah said quietly. "Jacob might be gone, but legally I am still his wife." Martha made a dismissive sound. "A man who abandons his family in a blizzard has no right to call himself a husband." "There are ways to end a marriage, especially out here where law is more about what is right than what is written down. But I am not pushing you, dear. I just want you to know that if you have feelings for my son, you should not let fear or the past stop you from considering a future. You deserve happiness, and so does he." That night, Delilah lay awake in the small guest room and thought about Martha's words. Did she have feelings for Malcolm? It seemed too soon, too impossible, but she could not deny the way her heart lifted when she heard his boots on the porch, the way she found herself watching for him through the window as he worked, the way his rare smiles made warmth spread through her entire body. She thought about the way he had looked at her that morning when he came in from feeding the animals, his eyes meeting hers across the kitchen and holding for just a moment too long, something unspoken but undeniable passing between them. She was afraid, she realized. Afraid of trusting another man, afraid of being hurt again, afraid of what would happen if she opened her heart and it was broken once more. But she was also afraid of missing this chance, of letting fear rule her life so completely that she turned away from something that might be real and good and lasting. 2 weeks after Malcolm had found them in the blizzard, he asked Delilah if she would like to come see the ranch properly. Martha cheerfully volunteered to watch the children, shooing them out the door with a knowing smile that made Delilah blush and Malcolm look at his feet. He saddled 2 horses, a gentle mare for Delilah and his own steady buck, and they rode out across the snow-covered land under a sky so blue and clear it almost hurt to look at. Malcolm showed her the boundaries of the property, nearly 400 acres of Alaskan wilderness that his father had claimed and his family had worked for over 20 years. He showed her the summer pastures where the cattle grazed when the snow melted, the creek that ran through the property and never froze completely even in the deepest winter, the stand of timber that they harvested carefully for lumber and firewood. He talked more than she had ever heard him talk, his love for this land evident in every word, and she found herself falling a little more in love with him with each passing moment. They stopped on a ridge that overlooked the entire valley, and Malcolm helped her down from her horse, his hands strong and steady on her waist. They stood together looking out at the vista before them, at the mountains rising in the distance and the smoke curling from the chimney of the ranch house far below. "It is beautiful here," Delilah said softly. "Harsh, but beautiful." "It takes a strong woman to love this land," Malcolm said, and when she looked at him she found he was already watching her. "Take someone who can see past the cold and the isolation to the freedom and possibility underneath. My mother did it, left a comfortable life in Oregon to follow my father up here. She told me once that she never regretted it, not even on the hardest days. I never had a comfortable life to leave behind," Delilah said. "Maybe that makes it easier for me to see the good in a hard place. I would rather be cold and free than warm and trapped." Malcolm reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to move away if she wanted to, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were rough from work, but his touch was achingly gentle. "I know it has not been long," he said, his voice low and serious. "I know you have been through things no woman should have to endure, but I need you to know, Delilah, that I care about you, more than I have cared about anyone in a long time. You and your children, you feel like you belong here, like you were always meant to end up in that exact spot where I could find you." Delilah's breath caught in her chest, and she felt tears pricking at her eyes, but they were good tears this time, tears of hope instead of despair. "I care about you too," she whispered. "It scares me how much I care about you after such a short time. I never thought I could feel this way about anyone, never thought I deserved to feel this way." "You deserve everything good in this world," Malcolm said fiercely, both his hands coming up to cup her face now, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had spilled onto her cheeks. "You deserve a man who will stand by you in the storm instead of leaving you to face it alone. You deserve someone who will love your children like they were his own. You deserve happiness and safety and all the things you should have had from the beginning." "Malcolm," she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and questioning, and she was kissing him back with all the pent-up emotion and longing that had been building in her since the moment he had appeared out of the blizzard like an answered prayer. The kiss was everything a kiss should be, full of promise and possibility, and the kind of tenderness she had forgotten could exist between a man and a woman. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Malcolm rested his forehead against hers and smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face into something almost boyish. "I was hoping you would do that," he said. "I was hoping you would kiss me," she admitted, laughing a little through her tears. They rode back to the ranch house holding hands, something that should have been awkward on horseback but somehow was not. And when they arrived, Martha took one look at their faces and bustled the children into the kitchen for cookies, giving them privacy. Malcolm led Delilah into the front room and they sat together on the worn sofa, his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I want to marry you," Malcolm said after a while. "I know that is moving fast, and I know there are complications with your husband, but I want you to know that is where my heart is heading. I want you to be my wife, and I want to be a father to Sarah and Thomas. I want us to be a family, a real family built on love and respect." Delilah lifted her head to look at him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Jacob is not coming back. Everyone in Nome knows he left us in that storm. Martha was right. Out here the law is about what is right more than what is written on paper. We can go to the marshal, explain what happened, and I am certain he will grant me a divorce on grounds of abandonment and endangerment. It might take a few months, but it can be done." "Then that is what we will do," Malcolm said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And when you are free of him legally, I am going to marry you proper, with a ceremony and witnesses and everything right and good. But until then, you and the children stay here, where you are safe and wanted and loved." The months that followed were some of the happiest of Delilah's life, which felt strange and wrong sometimes given how close she had come to dying. But she learned to accept joy when it came and stop questioning whether she deserved it. The marshal in Nome was a practical man who had seen his share of good people abandoned by bad partners, and he agreed that Delilah had grounds for divorce. Jacob had been seen in one of Nome's many saloons the same night he left his family in the storm, drinking and bragging about how he was finally free to head to the gold fields without being slowed down by a nagging wife and crying children. The marshal sent notices to several territorial papers, giving Jacob a chance to contest the divorce if he chose, but everyone knew he would not show up. While they waited for the legal proceedings to finalize, life on the ranch continued. Winter slowly gave way to spring, and with the spring came an explosion of life and color that took Delilah's breath away. The snow melted to reveal wildflowers carpeting the meadows in shades of purple and yellow and white. The creek swelled with runoff and became a rushing river full of jumping fish. The cattle that had huddled in the protected valley all winter spread out across the new grass, calves frolicking beside their mothers. Birds returned by the thousands, filling the air with song. Sarah and Thomas bloomed too, their pale faces turning rosy and healthy, their bodies growing strong from good food and outdoor play. Sarah helped Martha in the garden that was planted as soon as the ground thawed, learning the names of vegetables and herbs and how to coax things to grow in the short Alaskan summer. Thomas followed Malcolm everywhere, his little wooden horse always in his pocket, trying to copy everything the tall cowboy did. Malcolm taught him how to whistle, how to skip stones across the creek, how to gentle a skittish horse with patience and quiet words. Delilah learned too, learning skills she had never had the chance to develop before. Martha taught her how to bake bread that rose high and light, how to preserve food for the long winter, how to turn scraps of fabric into quilts that would keep a family warm through the coldest nights. Malcolm taught her to ride properly, to shoot a rifle in case she ever needed to protect herself or the children, to read the weather in the clouds and the wind. Every new skill made her feel more capable, more confident, more like she truly belonged in this wild place. In the evenings, they would all gather in the front room, Martha in her rocking chair with her knitting, the children playing on the floor with the growing collection of carved animals Malcolm made for them, and Delilah and Malcolm sitting close together on the sofa. Sometimes Malcolm would read aloud from one of the books in the house, his deep voice bringing stories to life. Sometimes they would just talk, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams of their futures. Sometimes they would sit in comfortable silence, and those times were just as precious as the ones filled with words. Malcolm courted her properly despite the fact that they were living under the same roof, bringing her wildflowers he picked on his rides around the ranch, saving the best pieces of meat for her plate at dinner, finding excuses to touch her hand or brush against her shoulder as they passed in the hallway. They stole kisses when Martha had taken the children for walks, sweet stolen moments that left Delilah breathless and wanting more. But Malcolm was always respectful, always conscious of her past trauma, and never pushing her beyond what she was comfortable with. One night in early summer, when the sun barely set at all and the sky stayed light until nearly midnight, Malcolm took her for a walk down to the creek. They sat on a fallen log and watched the water rush past, their shoulders touching, his hand clasped around hers. "The divorce will be final next week," Malcolm said. "Marshall sent word this morning. Jacob never responded to any of the notices, and the judge has agreed to grant it in absentia." Delilah felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. "I will truly be free," she said wonderingly. "You have always been free," Malcolm corrected gently. "But yes, legally you will be your own woman again, which means I can ask you this properly." He slid off the log and onto one knee in the soft grass beside the creek, and Delilah's breath caught as she realized what he was doing. "Delilah Rose Zimmerman, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? I promise to love you and cherish you and stand by your side through every storm life throws at us. I promise to be a good father to Sarah and Thomas, and to any other children we might be blessed with. I promise that you will never doubt your worth or your place in my heart. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Delilah said, the word coming out choked with happy tears. "Yes, Malcolm, I will marry you. I love you so much it frightens me sometimes, how much I love you." Malcolm surged to his feet and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as they both laughed with pure joy. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, thoroughly, in a way that promised all the good things their future would hold. When they finally broke apart, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple gold with a small but beautiful sapphire set in the center. "It was my grandmother's," he said as he slipped it onto her finger, where it fit as if it had been made for her. "Ma gave it to me years ago, told me to save it for the woman who made my heart sing. That is you, Delilah. You make my heart sing in ways I did not know were possible." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Nome. Martha cried happy tears and served as Delilah's matron of honor, while the town blacksmith, one of Malcolm's few close friends, stood up as his best man. Sarah wore a new dress that Martha had sewn for the occasion, pale yellow with white ribbons, and she took her role as flower girl very seriously, scattering petals with great concentration. Thomas carried the rings on a small pillow, looking proud and important in his little suit. When the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, Delilah held her breath, half afraid that Jacob would somehow appear to ruin this perfect day. But the church remained silent except for a baby fussing in the back row. And when Malcolm lifted her veil and kissed her as his wife, she felt something broken inside her finally heal completely. The wedding supper was held at the ranch, with neighbors from the surrounding properties coming to celebrate and bringing food enough to feed twice as many people. There was music and dancing, and Malcolm proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, sweeping Delilah around the cleared space in the barn with confidence and grace. He danced with Sarah too, letting her stand on his feet as he waltzed her around, making her giggle with delight. He taught Thomas how to bow to the ladies, solemn and serious, and every woman there took a turn dancing with the little boy. As the sun began its brief dip toward the horizon, Malcolm took Delilah's hand and led her away from the party, out to the ridge where they had shared their first kiss months before. They stood together looking out at the land that was now truly theirs, her head resting against his shoulder, his arms wrapped around her waist from behind. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Delilah answered honestly. "6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I would die in that blizzard with my children, and I had accepted it. But you found us, Malcolm. You saved us, and you gave us not just our lives back, but a life worth living." "You saved me too," Malcolm said, turning her in his arms so he could look into her eyes. "I did not realize how lonely I was until you were here. This ranch, this life, it all felt empty before you came. Now it feels full and rich and exactly what I always hoped it would be." They stayed on the ridge until the party below had wound down and the last of the guests had left. Then they walked hand in hand back to the ranch house, to the home they now shared as husband and wife, to the life they would build together in this beautiful, harsh, unforgiving land that had somehow given them both everything they had ever wanted. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Malcolm loved her with a tenderness and patience that erased every bad memory Jacob had left her with. He worshipped her body like it was something precious, murmuring words of love and praise against her skin, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. When she cried afterward, he held her close and let her tears fall against his chest, understanding without words that she was crying not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally knowing what making love was supposed to feel like. The summer passed in a golden haze of happiness. Delilah threw herself into being a rancher's wife, working alongside Malcolm in the fields and with the animals. She learned to deliver calves in the middle of the night, to stitch up wounds on both humans and animals, to keep the accounts and manage the household finances. Malcolm treated her as a true partner, asking her opinion on everything from where to plant the new pasture to whether they should buy more cattle or focus on horses. Her ideas were valued and respected, and slowly she began to see herself the way Malcolm saw her, as a capable, intelligent, strong woman instead of the worthless burden Jacob had always told her she was. Sarah started lessons with Martha, learning her letters and numbers, and proved to be a quick study with a hunger for knowledge that delighted her grandmother. Yes, she called Martha grandmother now, and called Malcolm Papa, and the first time Thomas had run to Malcolm crying about a scraped knee and called him Papa, Malcolm had picked him up and held him for a long time, his face buried in the boy's hair, and Delilah had seen his shoulders shake and known he was crying. As summer turned to fall, Delilah began to suspect that she might be pregnant. She waited another month to be sure, paying attention to the signs her body was giving her, before she told Malcolm one evening after the children were in bed. He had been sitting at the table going over some accounts, and she came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders, resting her cheek against his head. "Malcolm, I have something to tell you." He must have heard something in her voice because he immediately pushed the ledger away and turned to pull her onto his lap. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," she assured him, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "Everything is very, very right. We are going to have a baby, Malcolm, sometime in the spring, I think." For a moment he just stared at her, his expression stunned, and then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen from him. "A baby! We are having a baby." "We are having a baby," she confirmed, laughing at his obvious delight. Malcolm kissed her soundly and then dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands on her waist, his forehead pressed against her stomach. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for trusting me enough to build this life with me. Thank you for giving me a family. I promise I will be the best father I can be to all our children, born to me or not. I promise I will never let any of you doubt how much you are loved." Martha was overjoyed at the news, immediately beginning to knit tiny clothes and plan for the new arrival. Sarah was excited at the prospect of being a big sister to another baby, asking endless questions about where babies came from, and how long it would take and whether it would be a boy or a girl. Thomas was less impressed, more concerned about whether a baby would play with his wooden horses, but he came around when Delilah assured him that he would be a big brother, and that was a very important job. That winter was harsh, as Alaskan winters always were, but it held no terror for Delilah this time. She spent the cold months safe and warm in the ranch house, growing large with child, helping Martha with the endless tasks that kept a household running. Malcolm was attentive and doting, constantly worried that she was doing too much, trying to take over her chores until she laughingly told him that pregnant women had been working since the beginning of time, and she was perfectly capable of kneading bread. The baby came in late April, arriving with the first real warmth of spring. Martha served as midwife, her experienced hands guiding both the baby and Delilah through the process. Malcolm wore a path in the kitchen floor pacing, with Sarah and Thomas watching him with wide eyes, until Martha finally called him in to meet his son. Delilah was exhausted but glowing, her hair damp with sweat and her face flushed, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket that Martha had knitted. Malcolm approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and when he looked down at the tiny red face of his son, his eyes filled with tears. "He is perfect," Malcolm said in wonder, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers immediately closed around his father's much larger finger, and Malcolm made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. "He is absolutely perfect. "We need to name him," Delilah said softly. "I thought, if you agree, we could call him Matthew. Matthew Joseph Anderson. Matthew means gift of God, and that is what he is. What all of you are to me, gifts I never thought I would receive." "Matthew," Malcolm repeated, trying it out. "Yes, Matthew Joseph Anderson. It is a strong name for what I am sure will be a strong boy." He bent and kissed Delilah's forehead, lingering there for a moment. "You are amazing. You know that. Absolutely amazing." Sarah and Thomas were allowed in to meet their new brother, and they were both awed into rare silence by the tiny baby. Sarah wanted to hold him immediately, so Delilah showed her how to sit very still and support his head, and they placed Matthew carefully in her arms. The look of wonder on Sarah's face as she held her baby brother was something Delilah knew she would remember for the rest of her life. The years that followed were full of the kind of joy that comes from building something lasting with someone you love. The ranch prospered under Malcolm and Delilah's joint management. They expanded the herd, built new outbuildings, and began breeding horses that became known throughout the territory for their hardiness and intelligence. Delilah proved to have a natural gift with horses, able to gentle even the most stubborn animals, and her training program became a significant source of income for the ranch. Sarah grew into a bright, capable young woman who loved books as much as she loved riding across the open land. Thomas developed into a skilled rancher, learning everything Malcolm could teach him and constantly pushing to learn more. Matthew was a sunny, cheerful child who found joy in everything and had both his parents wrapped around his little finger. 3 years after Matthew was born, Delilah gave Malcolm a daughter they named Martha Grace, after Malcolm's mother and the grace that had brought them all together. 2 years after that came another son, Daniel Robert, who had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. The house was full of noise and laughter and love, everything a home should be. Malcolm's mother lived to see all her grandchildren, passing away peacefully in her sleep when Matthew was 8 years old. They buried her on the ridge overlooking the ranch, where she could watch over the family she had helped build. Her passing was sad but not tragic, as she had lived a long, full life and died knowing her son was happy and her grandchildren were thriving. One evening when Delilah was 38 years old and Malcolm was 41, they took their customary walk together after dinner, leaving Sarah, now 15, in charge of her younger siblings. They walked hand in hand to their favorite spot by the creek, now worn smooth from years of their visits, and sat together watching the water flow past. "You ever think about that day?" Malcolm asked. "The day I found you in the blizzard, all the time," Delilah admitted. "I think about how close we came to never meeting, about how different my life would be if you had not gone out that day or if your horse had not led you to us. It terrifies me sometimes, how easily I could have missed you, missed all of this happiness." "I think about it too," Malcolm said. "I think about how you and the children were dying out there, and how if I had been even an hour later it would have been too late. But then, I also think that maybe it was not chance at all. Maybe it was fate or God or whatever you want to call it, bringing us together because we were meant to be together. Bringing you to the exact right spot at the exact right time for me to save you, because you were going to save me right back." Delilah leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and soap and something that was just Malcolm. "You did save me, in every way a person can be saved. You gave me back my life and then you made that life beautiful. I love you, Malcolm Anderson. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you, Delilah Anderson," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "You and our children are the greatest blessings of my life. Every single day I wake up grateful that I went out in that blizzard, grateful that I found you, grateful for every moment we have had and will have together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn pink and gold with the sunset that came late in the Alaskan summer. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of their children playing, young Matthew's laughter ringing out clear and bright, and little Daniel's voice calling for his papa. The ranch house glowed with lamplight in the gathering dusk, smoke curling from the chimney, a beacon of warmth and home. "We should go back," Delilah said eventually, though she made no move to stand. "The children will be getting hungry for their bedtime snack." "In a minute," Malcolm said, pulling her closer. "Let me just hold you for one more minute." So they sat together as the stars began to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. Two people who had found each other in the midst of a blizzard and built a love strong enough to withstand any storm. They had created a family, not through blood alone but through choice and commitment and the daily decision to love each other well. They had built a home in the wilderness, a place of safety and laughter and belonging for everyone lucky enough to be part of it. When they finally walked back to the house, their children came running to greet them, all five of them clamoring for attention, for hugs, for Papa to come play a game or Mama to settle a dispute. Malcolm swept little Daniel up onto his shoulders while Delilah took Martha Grace's hand, and together they went inside, closing the door on the cool evening air. That night, after all the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Delilah and Malcolm lay together in their room, her head on his chest, his arms around her, and talked about their plans for the future. They wanted to expand the horse breeding program, maybe take on an apprentice to help with the training. They discussed what to do about Sarah, who was showing an interest in becoming a teacher and might need to go to school in Seattle or even San Francisco. They wondered if Thomas, at 13, was old enough to start taking on more responsibility around the ranch, or if they should wait another year. But mostly they just held each other, taking comfort in the solid presence of the other, in the warmth of their shared bed, in the knowledge that tomorrow they would wake up together and face whatever the day brought as partners. They had weathered literal storms and metaphorical ones, had built something strong and true from the ashes of Delilah's old life and the loneliness of Malcolm's. Years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable changes that time always brings. Sarah did go away to school, returning 3 years later as a certified teacher and taking a position at the schoolhouse in Nome. She married a good man, a merchant's son who treated her with respect and love, and gave Delilah and Malcolm their first grandchildren. Thomas took over more and more of the daily ranch operations as Malcolm's joints began to stiffen with age, proving himself more than capable of running things. He married the daughter of a neighboring rancher, bringing her home to the ranch where she fit in as seamlessly as Delilah once had. Matthew became a veterinarian, the first in the family to go to university, but he came back to Alaska to practice, saying he could never imagine living anywhere else. Martha Grace inherited her mother's gift with horses and became known throughout the territory as the best horse trainer in Alaska. Daniel, the youngest, turned out to have a gift for music and spent winters teaching piano and guitar in Nome, though he always came home to the ranch for the summer to help with the work. Through it all, Malcolm and Delilah remained the steady heart of the family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, mourned losses and rejoiced in victories, always together, always united. They rocked grandchildren to sleep and taught them to ride and told them stories of the old days, when Alaska was even wilder than it was now. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a huge party at the ranch, with friends and family coming from all over the territory to celebrate. There was food and music and dancing, and when Malcolm took Delilah in his arms for a waltz, just as he had on their wedding day, everyone stopped to watch them. They moved together with the ease of long practice, two people who knew each other's rhythms as well as they knew their own. 25 years, Malcolm said softly as they danced. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I found you in that storm, and sometimes it feels like you have been part of my life forever. Both are true, Delilah said, smiling up at him. The time has flown by because we have been happy, but you have also become so essential to me that I cannot remember what life was like before you. You are woven into every part of who I am now. The best 25 years of my life, Malcolm said. Here is to 25 more. And though neither of them would live to see their 50th anniversary, as Malcolm passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68, they did have another 18 good years together. Years filled with more grandchildren, with the continued success of the ranch, with quiet evenings on the porch watching the sun set over the land they both loved. When Malcolm died, Delilah mourned him deeply but without regret, because they had used their time together well, had loved each other thoroughly, had built something lasting. Delilah lived another 8 years after Malcolm passed, staying on the ranch that Thomas now ran with his wife and children. She spent her days helping with the grandchildren, working with the horses she still loved, and sitting on the ridge where Malcolm had proposed, talking to him as if he could hear her. She told him about the children and grandchildren, about the ranch news, about how much she missed him but how grateful she was for every moment they had shared. When Delilah died at the age of 71, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last words were of Malcolm. "I can see him," she whispered, a smile on her face. "He is waiting for me just like he promised he would." And then she closed her eyes and slipped away, going to join the man who had saved her life and then spent the rest of his own making sure that life was worth living. They buried her beside Malcolm on the ridge, two simple headstones side by side, with a view of the ranch spread out below them. The inscription on her headstone read, "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother," but her children added one more line at the bottom. "She was lost in a storm and found by love." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from Thomas to his children and then to their children. The story of how Malcolm found Delilah and the children in the blizzard became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of courage and love, and the way fate sometimes brings people together exactly when they need each other most. The ridge where Malcolm and Delilah were buried became a place of pilgrimage for the family, a place to go when big decisions needed to be made or comfort was needed, because everyone felt that somehow Malcolm and Delilah were still there, still watching over the family they had created. Sarah's great-great-granddaughter, a woman named Emma who had inherited Delilah's green eyes and Malcolm's dark hair, stood on that ridge more than 100 years after the blizzard that had changed everything. She was 23 years old, the same age Delilah had been when Malcolm found her, and she was facing her own storm of uncertainty about her future. She had come to the ridge seeking guidance, the way so many family members had before her. As she stood there looking out at the ranch that still bore the Anderson name, still raised cattle and horses, still stood as a testament to what two people could build together when they loved each other well, Emma felt a sense of peace wash over her. She might not know exactly what her future held, but she knew she came from strong stock, from people who had survived impossible situations and built beautiful lives anyway. She carried Delilah's courage and Malcolm's steadiness in her very bones, passed down through the generations along with the story of how it all began. A wind kicked up, warm despite the late season, and Emma could have sworn she heard laughter in it, the sound of children playing and a man's deep voice and a woman's gentle response. She smiled and touched the headstone, worn smooth now by years of weather and family hands seeking connection. "Thank you," she said softly, to Malcolm and Delilah, to all her ancestors who had worked this land and loved this place and made her existence possible. "Thank you for not giving up, even when it would have been easier to do so. Thank you for finding each other and for building something that has lasted long after you were gone. I will do my best to honor that legacy." And then she walked back down the ridge toward the ranch house, where her own future waited, whatever that might be. Behind her, if anyone had been there to see it, the setting sun cast long shadows across the two graves, shadows that seemed to reach out and intertwine, forever joined even in death, just as Malcolm and Delilah had been joined in life by a blizzard and a miracle and a love strong enough to echo through generations.